Well, greetings everyone. Welcome back. Here we are again. That was a great intro, Alan. Alan Shavitz, responsible for our wonderful graphics. Thank you again. I hadn't seen that before. That was pretty slick. Again, I'm Scott Pinsky, chair of the Marin Coalition. I welcome you again to our program on the June primary election candidates and measures. Just to remind you all, the program is being recorded today, as always, and therefore, if you missed part of it or you want to forward this to your friends, you can find the recorded version on our website, marincoalition.org. Go to our archives, and this program will be there as well as all our previous programs. Couple of housekeeping matters, and I'll put up a slide on that and just run through what I'm talking about. The program will be recorded, as I mentioned. Also, we have closed captioning available. If you would like, you go to the live transcript tab at the bottom, and that should bring up the text. Questions and answers, please send your questions to us via the Q&A tab, also at the bottom of your Zoom window. And finally, just as most of you know, Marin Coalition is an all-volunteer nonprofit public affairs forum based here in Marin County. We present speakers from varied perspectives and sectors of our community to create conversations that truly matter. And we thank you and our members and our donors for helping to make these programs possible and continuing to support us to create a better informed Marin County. A couple of items of Marin Coalition business before we get going, just very briefly. Next week, we will be sending out to members an announcement about this year's board election and also a set of bylaws amendments that we are presenting to the members for approval. All the voting again this year will be done virtually via email since we're not doing in-person meetings. As far as the next program, we do not have something scheduled at this point. This may be the last program of the season. We're not sure. We'll keep you informed if we're able to get something arranged for a June program. And then as far as next season, we still haven't made a decision as to whether or not we'll be able to return to in-person programs at McGinnis or not. We'll continue to watch the situation with the pandemic, but obviously for issues of public health and safety, we want to be mindful of doing the right thing. And so we'll continue to watch that and try to get back to a normal life as soon as we can, given the considerations involved. Lastly, we want to share some sad news. A longtime board member of ours, Paul Primo, passed away earlier this year. Paul was a great asset to our organization, both as a board member and also as a presenter for many years, and he became a friend to us all. His contributions to the operation and success of Marin Coalition were many, and his personal warmth was an asset that will be greatly missed by everyone. Farewell, Paul. So let me turn now to today's presentation. You know our speakers, you've seen them, you love them, they're back. Greg Brockbank, the self-confessed political junkie of Marin politics, having compiled candidate lists for over 20 years, is one of our speakers. A frequent speaker and writer, he appears frequently on public access TV to analyze and discuss local elections. Greg is a 30-year plus attorney, owner and operator of Marin Law Center, and a past chair of the Marin Democratic Party. He's served on the boards of several dozen civic and political organizations here in Marin, including 22 years as an elected official on the College of Marin Board of Trustees and on the San Rafael City Council. Dick Spotswood, political and government columnist for the Marin Independent Journal. You've read him for years. His IJ columns appear every Sunday and Wednesday in the IJ. A San Francisco native, Dick is a former Mill Valley City Council member and also a 3-term mayor of that city. He served for 10 years between 1982 to, let me get that right, 1982 to 1992. Don't want to make you older than any of us are here. He served as a director of the Golden Gate Bridge, Highway and Transportation District, representing Marin's 11 cities and towns. After 4 decades as an attorney, Dick has now retired from the law. Good for you. All right. I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. That's the end of me for now. I will be back to help get the questions into the program. Send them to us via your Q&A tab, as I mentioned. And it's my great pleasure to welcome back Dick and Greg. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I just give a note about why we're here now? They changed the timing of elections, as some of you will undoubtedly remember, some of you will undoubtedly not. Local elections were always in odd-numbered years for decades in Marin, but the turnout was much lower than in even-numbered years when we voted for president and governor. So they made us change everybody to basically even-numbered years. So we have no more elections at all in odd-numbered years like last year, if you don't count the gubernatorial recall, which I don't because nothing changed. But this year is everything. So now our elections are twice as crowded with local and national stuff. And I used to be more detailed about all the numbers, and I don't want to overwhelm you with numbers, but when they all moved to even-numbered years, most of them moved to November. So this November, we will indeed have a very crowded ballot with lots of local races, school boards, special districts, city councils, you name it, we got lots of it. But this one is fairly small, and there's only a few of those that are contested. So Dick and I should have plenty of time to talk about, why is my screen getting weird here? The few contested races. In fact, Dick, we agreed we didn't plan an order too much other than local, state, and national. So local, you have a preference to start out with, like assembly race or supervisorial races or county superintendent of public instruction?
Well, sheriff, I would think,
Sheriff.
Yeah, unopposed. and district attorney, unopposed. Two races, by the way, what people were rumoring for a long time. Oh, those are going to be big races. Well, in fact, Sheriff Bob Doyle's basically handpicked successor will be the new sheriff. And the district attorney, Lori Fragoli, will be around for another 4 years. They're unopposed. What are opposed, and I think probably the most noteworthy local races, is for the County Board of Supervisors, the first district, San Rafael, where Damon Conley is giving up his seat to run for the assembly, and in the 5th district up in Nevada, Greater Nevada, where Judy Arnold, after 4 terms, is stepping down and retiring. And so we have a vigorous contest in those 2 districts. Thoughts on them?
Could I question your use of the word vigorous? Vigorous might imply to some people like it's a really close race. Maybe not so much in Nevada. Eric Lucan actually has 3 challengers, but I don't know that any of them are strong. Eric Lucan has become an institution. I remember when he was a young outsider that I thought, how's this guy going to break through? And suddenly he got Judy Arnold's support, and suddenly everybody's support, and suddenly he's on the council for what, 9 years? That's a long time.
I still see with 3 campaigning candidates and Jason Saris, who's not particularly campaigning, a homeless advocate, formerly homeless guy, a runoff. I see a runoff. I don't see Eric Lucan making 50%. Just be on the math. Put 4 names out there. I mean, you put out there anybody, Joe Dokes, Jane Dokes. They're going to get 5-10% because somebody says, I knew Dokes. They didn't, but they thought they did.
Often that's true. But the last big contested supervisorial, well, almost every year, or at least every other year, there's a couple of contested supervisorial race. But about 10 years ago, when Katie Rice was running for re-election, and so was Kate Sears,
Yes.
Both thought they might be in trouble. A lot of people thought they might both be in trouble. Both thought they would be headed for a runoff. Both won handily, far better than expected against strong challengers. Kate Sears beat Susan Kirsch, who was very strong,
Yes.
by a surprisingly large margin. And Katie Rice beat Frank Egger and somebody else by an even larger margin and avoided a runoff.
Well, Frank was well known, but that may have been his problem. He's an interesting guy, quirky guy, and yes, that's true. I certainly think there's a runoff. But, well, I won't say that. I think there is a runoff in both districts. That's my hunch.
Well, actually, there can't be a runoff in the first district because it's just 2 candidates.
No,
So,
there are 3 candidates.
oh, that's right. I forgot about the George.
Yes, George Shoroboulos, who has not raised very much money, who's refused to show up at the IJ editorial board, who was unavailable for the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers candidates night. He is showing up on the 22nd at the Republican Federated Women's Organization at Loch Lomond Yacht Club, but they're only inviting Republican candidates.
Now, I know it's true that you get a certain number of votes just being on the ballot, but not very many. Peter Romanowski, for example, and there are a number of others in Marin political history in the last few decades that you and I could probably conjure up out of our memories. They get very few votes, 5 or 10% max.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking, 5-10%. But if you have a close race between the other top 2, Mary Sackett and Gina Daley, presume for the sake of argument, it's a close. There are 2 very credible candidates. Gina Sackett and Mary Sackett and Gina Daley, you would agree, are both very credible candidates.
Usually supervisors come from county city council members, and we've had more than our share of that. That's fine. Sometimes they're supervisorial aides like Katie Rice and now Mary Sackett. I would have guessed that for that reason alone, she would have been the front runner. 5 years she's been doing this. She's an attorney. She's been involved in some things, and Damon's endorsed her. But she is not the overwhelming front runner. Gina Daley, who was elected a year and a half ago to the Santa Fe School Board, and I remember seeing her in a candidates forum then and saying, wow, she's kind of a hotshot activist.
Yeah.
Not surprising, kind of typical for a school board candidate, but she's good. She should win, and she did. But I was a little surprised to see her run for assembly a year and a half later, which usually requires more experience than a year and a half on the school board.
Running for supervisor.
I'm sorry, supervisor, which usually requires more experience than a year and a half on a school board. But she is somewhat impressive. But I was a little disturbed that, Mary Sackett has 4 of the 5 supervisors endorsing her, and a whole long raft of other elected officials, which I admit, having been in the system for so many decades, an elected official myself for long, like you, I may tend to be overly swayed by elected officials. At least the length of the list tells you you're a mainstream candidate. And usually the mainstream candidate gets most of them, sometimes 80-90% of them. And if the challenger or the not the mainstream one gets only 5% or 10%, a few lonely little elected officials, well, they don't have a very big network. They're not likely to get elected. They may have a tougher learning curve when they get elected, if they do get elected, and they may not be as good because they don't have the community base and support of the community leaders that the one with all the endorsements does.
Well, the inverse of that is that when all those other supervisors and staff members, people like that, endorse Mary Sackett, the word is she's virtually the incumbent. And I'm not aware that incumbents are particularly popular at this point in time in United States history. So I'm not sure if I was given the choice of positioning, I don't think I'd want to run as an aide to a supervisor. Because frankly, Sacramento was filled with former aides, the legislature, all of whom are lifers. This is their life. And that's why we have kind of not a bad legislature, but a mediocre legislature. It is mediocre. And not to slam just the Democrats, the few Republicans that are around are hardly shining stars. So it's a bipartisan mediocrity.
I do want to take up that issue again when we talk about the assembly race, but now let's finish the Santa Fe race and then the Nevada race, which we touched on in the abandoned without talking about the other 3. But Mary Sackett and Gina Daley, I started to mention that she seemed like the front runner when she first announced, but now I've changed my mind and I don't think that at all, because I think Gina Daley is such a strong candidate, and they both raise good money, and it's hard to tell. I think it will be close. I'm a little surprised by that, but in a candidates forum I saw, Mary Sackett says, "I'm not flashy." Some people interpret that as I'm boring, and that wouldn't be far off. On the other hand, Gina Daley, I was a little disturbed by her statements about how I've been recruited to run. The Labor Council wants me. This. You've been recruited to run when Mary Sackett your opponent has all these endorsements of the existing supervisors, which I agree is kind of an inside ball game for some of those endorsements, but awful lot of others too. I told Mary Sackett that she's in exactly the same position Katie Rice was when she first ran for supervisor. Everyone knew she was a good supervisorial aide, but no one knew if she was a good candidate, and no one knew if she'd be a good supervisor. Turned out she was both, I think. Not everybody agrees, but no one ever will. But Mary Sackett's in the same position. She may have a good reputation as a supervisorial aide. That doesn't mean she'll be a good candidate. We're learning that now. And who knows whether she'll be a good supervisor if she wins. We'll learn that too if she wins. I'm
not sure many people in Santa Fe sit down and say, my God, I think I'm going to vote for the person endorsed by the Southern Marin supervisor. Now, Santa Fe endorsements, I think, are more important. But oddly enough, they split. Mary Sackett has been endorsed by former Mayor Al Borrow. I just had a long chat with Al the other day. He's doing well, by the way. And Gina Daley has been endorsed by former Santa Fe Mayor Gary Phillips. Phillips and Borrow, of course, were very close friends and colleagues. So it's not a political thing. It was more of obviously they made their own decision based on their own experience. But I just, when it comes to endorsements, I think hometown endorsements are worth a lot more than non-hometown endorsements.
Oh, I agree. I agree with that. And your point about those endorsements are very good. And I thought what was interesting is that you're right that Mary Sackett is somewhat like an incumbent. And so not endorsing Mary Sackett, is that kind of like a slap at Damon Connolly? And Damon was very close to Gary Phillips. So why would he be endorsing
I
Gina
don't think that Gary Phillips, having spoken with him, I don't think Gary Phillips would make his endorsement based on anything other than who he thought would be the better candidate. It doesn't have a relationship to, he's not slamming Damon Connolly.
And Gina Daley and others may be, and probably are, smart politicians, whether we see it or know it or not. And they went out of their way when they first got elected to the school board a year and a half ago or whatever to meet the key people on the city council and mayor and make a good impression. And they saw what a fireball go-getter she was, and they remembered that, and they say, yeah, and they don't have a particularly positive impression about Mary Sackett, so they endorsed Gina Daley. That's my best guess.
On the Nevada race, I no question, Eric Lucan's a favorite. I mean, I buy that 100%. The only question is he's always been, let's put it this way, the Nevada supervisor, particularly Judy Arnold, has had influence with the city council and vice versa. There's a kind of a linkage there. I think it's safe to say not everybody in Nevada buys into that. And so that's the question there. There is a distinct linkage. I don't see it in the Gina Daley, Mary Sackett race, but I do see the linkage between Judy Arnold and Eric Lucan.
Since Eric Lucan is such a Judy Arnold protege, if you will, people that are unhappy with the current state of affairs on the Board of Supervisors may not only hold it against Judy Arnold, they may hold it against her protege, Eric Lucan.
Exactly.
And that's a big enough group. Now let's talk about the opponents, which whom we haven't mentioned. Everyone knew Kevin Morrison was going to run again. He ran twice, I think, against Eric Lucan for council and lost pretty badly. I thought he's kind of a wild man, accusing everybody of all sorts of things and only he can fix it. I thought, oh, geez. But this time he's better. You said he's much better. He was a good Earth Day at Mill Valley a week and a half ago. Very good.
I've seen Morrison a number of times in the past. This year, I don't know why, he seems much more solid. And he interviews well. He interviews very well. I can tell you at the IJ editorial board, he interviewed very well. And I thought at the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers, just that he did very well as well. Not really, I mean, he's not defending the incumbents. Of course, he's not an incumbent. And he's running against the person who's identified with the incumbents. You got to go. You can't say all is well. And so, and Scott, what's his name? Colin
Daly.
Daly is the same theory. Daly's a deputy sheriff. He had been in very interesting backgrounds and other stuff in his life. He just had a varied life experience, which is good, you know. And he's angrier, but not angry in a way that's offensively angry to the point of, you know what I'm talking about. But law and order. It's not that way. That's not how he comes across. He comes across as a person who's not happy with the status quo, very unhappy with the status quo, but feels that he simply can do better. And that's why we have elections.
Is he heavily emphasis on law and order as one might expect from a deputy sheriff?
Heavy. Well, I think the law and order issue comes up with homeless issues. And that's an interesting question. I don't know if you read David Brooks the other day on 7 lessons for the Democrats in the New York Times.
I meant to read it, but did not.
Go read it. First of all, the Democrats should write down all the 7 lessons. And one of it is don't wave away crime as a non-issue. I fully expected San Francisco, Chesa Boudin to be former district attorney in about 5 weeks.
Could be. Hey, it's happening at every level. I just recently joined the board of my homeowners association, and a number of them are very big on local crime. And I agree that that's important to a degree. But if you have nothing, I think everybody does, especially we political junkies, evaluate a candidate on, do they have a big enough network of people that they know that are going to give them money so they can raise it and get endorsements and send out mailers to people and tell them why they should vote for them? Right. Most people don't have any of those things, and they have no chance of winning almost. It'd be a fluke if they win, especially against a well-oiled machine like Eric Lucan.
Or Judy Arnold.
Yeah.
That operation. Well, that's why Lucan's the strong favorite.
Yeah, and now Colin Daly came out of nowhere, hadn't heard he was going to run. I mentioned Kevin Morrison, I figured he would run. But a lot of this happens so quick. I mean, filing is from mid-July to mid-August. When filing closes in mid-August, candidates are just scrambling. Often they've just decided to run. They sign up, they write a ballot statement, which is a huge, huge thing. If you spend less than a few hours on it, you're giving it short shrift. So you write this thing and say, that's the most important thing, I'm done. No, then the real work begins. Then you start madly typing out questionnaires, like as many a day as you possibly can. And then, oh yes, and everybody wants me to appear at candidates forums. Oh yes, I'm appearing at candidates forums. As many as I can. The two biggest candidates forums are the two first. They're both by countywide organizations, and they're the most influential. And if you get those two endorsements, you will win. If you don't, you will lose. They are the Marin Democratic Party and the Marin Women's Political Action Committee. I'm on the endorsement committees of both. So I get to see these candidates early on, and I go to their other events, and I get to see them and hear them sometimes early in advance. But even political junkies like me, I've taken a 2-year absence. I'm just coming back.
Well, but Greg, the Democratic endorsement in a county where almost everybody's a Democrat or an independent leaning Democrat, including the candidates. I'm a Democrat. I'm going to vote for Mary Sackett. Oh, no, I'm going to Gina Daley. Democrats know that they're both Democrats.
Well, it's true.
Who cares what the Central Committee does?
They have a good candidates forum. They have a good candidates forum. And that's why I think people pay attention to the Democrats.
Democratic. It's like the Republican Central Committee. I mean, and I'm a former Central Committee member in my youth. So I say that as a Central Committee member who at the time said, well, I'm only 23. At least I got to start somewhere. And I was active in the Democratic clubs when I was a Democrat. Now, as you know, I'm an independent. But I think it's overrated, particularly in races where, you know, frankly, you've got 4 Democrats running for the state assembly, no Republicans, no independents. Do you really care who the coterie at the Central Committee endorses? It's like the state party. I went to the state party convention in San Diego where Ricara Laura was nominated. I was laughing at his comments. His qualifications, Ricardo Laura running against Mark Levine or vice versa. I'm gay, I'm Latino, and I'm labor. So what?
And we wonder why the Republicans hate identity politics. Good point.
But so what? Now you have headlines, I have it somewhere here, the Los Angeles Times, and the corruption, dump Laura. Los Angeles Times.
We hadn't gotten to the state issues yet, but that's a good one. When Mark Levine announced, I said, this guy has no chance.
Yeah.
Democrats are going to circle the wagons around their incumbent Laura, even if he is the weakest one, even if he barely won.
I know.
Even if he has these corruption issues. But Mark Levine is a pretty unlikely hero to take that on. Mark Levine had his own ethics issues when he was first elected to the assembly 10 years ago. He had this sleazy money from a Central Valley water company or growers or something and spent all this money on mailers for himself. That struck a lot of people the wrong way. And there were questions about him beforehand and questions about him since. But I can see the decision he made and why he made it. Why do one more term and compete with 3 times as many people that are graduating out of the assembly and don't have any place to go looking for the same jobs, and he might not get as good a one. Go for one now. And even if he loses, he will have a statewide network, and he's got a 2-year jump looking for a new job.
But what about the private sector?
I mean, they would like Levine more than incumbent.
What about just getting a regular job?
Many do. Many like to stay in politics. I don't know about Mark Levine. He surprised us 10 years ago by winning the assembly race. I remember his council race very well. I served him a couple of years, but I don't think he was going to win this, but it may be closer than we thought. And he fooled us once, he could fool us again. Once again, he may have special interest money to match Ricardo Laura's. I agree. All those things you wrote about, I think it's in your column about that Ricardo Laura did, I find despicable. That's horrible. He shouldn't do that. It makes me wonder why the Democrats circle the wagons around him. On the other hand, they don't dump it.
Gay, he's Latino, and he's labor.
I agree with those two. They're a little too quick to line with labor sometimes. Although we haven't talked about the county superintendent of schools race, and we did touch on this.
Let's go to that.
All right, the superintendent of schools race. I met John Carroll at a thing a couple of. Oh, who are you? Okay, I should have known who he was, but I didn't. Every superintendent in Marin has endorsed him. Now, to run against that, why? Marie Cernsic-Hodge, she's the one that ran for the Mill Valley School Board a year and a half ago and raised $17,000, which, as you know, is an astounding sum of money for a Mill Valley School Board race.
I don't know how you spend it.
Well, anyway, I think she just wanted to announce her presence in the Marin political scene and says, I'm going to play hardball. I'm going to raise $17,000 for a Marin Mill Valley School Board race. And she did, and she won, and she's on it. But now to turn around and run for, and I'm not saying she wasn't qualified. She may be, and she may be a good school board member. I don't know. You live in Mill Valley, but county superintendent of schools, you want to have the broad support of every education community. Mary Jane has had that in spades for 20 whatever years. Byron Mousy before her.
Yes.
And I can go back before that. You can too, but we're pretty soon we lose everybody in the audience. There's a bunch of political junkies in this audience, but Marie Stern-Sachaj doesn't have that. She's a brand new school trustee. I don't think people know her as an administrator at all. John Carroll apparently does.
First of all, I think Mary Jane Burke has done a very fine job as county superintendent of education, period. I think she's an extraordinary individual. Bowsy was great. It was there. I've watched both of them at the forums, and honestly, my ballot is blank right now.
What is it that impresses you about
I don't have it. I don't.
Something turns you off about John Carroll, or something you like about Marie Hodge?
No, it's not that. It's still vague in my mind. That's just it's too. She has something to say. He has something to say. The fact that every superintendent in the county endorsed him can either mean he's really establishment guy that's never going to do anything that's going to overturn. Well, one of my issues is we have too many districts. I think we have a ridiculous number of school districts. Ridiculous number of school.
Wait a minute, let me contest that. Have you ever heard Mary Jane's speech on the number of school districts Marin used to have? It was 2 or 3 times as many, and she went through decades in the early part of the 20th century and how we narrowed it down and narrowed it down and narrowed it down. And we're down to only 17 school districts now, which is half the number that Sonoma has. But everybody likes seeing their local school board in the supermarket saying, "Hey, so I can talk about schools." Couldn't do that if you had a San Francisco school board.
Everybody, I'll dispute one thing. It's not that everybody likes seeing their local school board members. Their local school board members like being at the supermarket and have people recognize them. Or if they don't, I'm on the school board. That's the problem. That's the problem. Now, 17 school districts in Marin County and 1 in Los Angeles, 1 in San Francisco. Do we really need 17 guys and 17 superintendents? No. Gladys Gilliland, who you remember, had the Gilliland plan for consolidation, and you basically consolidate the high school districts, make a high school district and its feeder districts a school district.
I would be in favor of that.
And I am too. That's my
we did a study 25, 30 years ago, Citizens League of Marin, really pulling out an old chestnut there, consolidation. And we fully supported that. And there's a side of me that still does. I just don't want to go headlong into a Marin County-wide school district, which might frustrate more people than it would satisfy.
But the Gladys Gilliland plan is efficiency, rational organization, fewer districts, but doesn't eliminate the personal touch.
Novato gets partway there with the only
Novato's
unified district, but the TAM district gets partway there with 3 big major high schools covering southern and central Marin. So we're already partway there in Novato and southern and central.
Oh no. First of all, I regard the TAM district as
a lot of little
dysfunctional, weak board. I hope they're listening. They're up for election this year. Give people a shot.
That's because of the nature of the board or the board members, as opposed to the fact that there are 16.
I'm the nature of the board members.
Really?
Yeah. I don't. Period. Let's just leave it at that.
I
would encourage other people who live in the Town Place High School district who feel qualified to run for the Town Place High School board. So we have a vigorous election this year. Let's go back to see some of those folks go door to door.
Let's go back to anti-incumbent fervor, as I call it, which you mentioned earlier a couple of times, and I wanted to respond. At various levels, it happens at various times. We've seen in Congress big waves of sweeping out the incumbents. We've seen it in the Board of Supervisors every decade or two. Incumbents get swept out of the Board of Supervisors. It happens in school boards and city councils occasionally. And you've referenced it in a way that makes me think that you suspect that there is an anti-incumbent fervor now at least 1 or 2 of those levels that might contribute to incumbents, or seeming incumbents, if you will, having less of a chance to win than I might have guessed otherwise, were there not for this.
Let me give you a topic and as an example. The homeless situation in California, Marin County, anywhere you put it, the West in California. Let's just stick to California. You ask any elected official, and they tell you what they've done. Well, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. But they never tell you what they've accomplished. They've made these wonderful efforts, well-intentioned efforts, that have failed consistently in homelessness. Failed. We ought to ask the question, not what have you done, what did you deliver? And if we answer that question, what do you deliver? The answer is going to be pretty pathetic when it comes to the homeless situation in California. from the top governor's office to city council. It is the biggest issue in the city of Los Angeles. And if you don't think San Francisco's leftism is overstated, but if you don't think the good folks of San Francisco are unhappy with the homeless situation in the city and county of San Francisco and feel that billions of dollars have been thrown down the garbage can, I think you're missing something. Not you personally, but the rhetorical you.
I agree. I've been a Chronicle junkie for 40 some odd years, so I do know that. But the question is, but that's been true for decades, a couple of decades. Is it so much worse now that they're ready to toss out incumbents in favor of challengers who don't have any ideas which are any more likely to work than those of incumbents? I agree with you that there's abysmal failure. There are good ideas out there that the incumbents are ignoring.
We have unfortunately faced the last 2.5 years in a very different world, basically locked up in our houses or our businesses, away from other people. That's tough. It's a new experience. It's not something that Americans or Europeans or Japanese or folks in Singapore, who are very upset right now, apparently, either took well or reacted well. The level of discourse in this country, bad already, was made worse during the pandemic. We were just angrier people. We were less in touch. As somebody said to me about a meeting I attended, we need to start meeting these people in person because they'll make less vitriolic statements than they will on Zoom. And God knows less vitriolic statements than on social media. I don't care if it's Nextdoor or Twitter. So there's an anger out there. And some of it is just because there's been 2 or 3 tough years.
There's a lot of truth to that, but national level, I haven't seen any indication in elections or even polls that there's a huge shift away from incumbents. At the state level, there's definitely not. Gavin Newsom survived the recall quite handily. So people are not unhappy with Gavin Newsom, even though I admit certainly there's grounds for failure. If you asked any politician, why have you spent 10 times as much on homelessness as you were spending 10 years ago? And homelessness increases X amount per year. And yet suddenly, and you have nothing to show for it. You're not reducing homelessness, are you? Those are good questions. And I wish somebody had an answer, and they don't. And I've attended hundreds of homelessness meetings, but it's addictive. It sucks you down a hole, right?
But the public is on that issue. They're not happy campers. Gavin Newsom, by the way, he needs to be very thankful. God was looking out after Gavin Newsom when they put the recall on the ballot. That was, from a tactical point of view, the Republicans' failure, political failure, and they can't control the base. I understand the official people, but basically that was either win or you give up the 2022 election. Gavin, and I think the number was he got 61 or 67% in 2018, one of those numbers. He got the exact same number in the recall. What does that tell the funders and donors and serious candidates that are going to run for office? He's going to get 61 to 67%.
So he comes out strong. So he comes out stronger and is less likely to lose this year. So the Republicans shot themselves in the foot by damaging their chances to win this year.
Well, who have they run? They haven't run a serious candidate. They run Brian Daly, who's apparently a nice guy, by the way, who's one of the few people that actually socializes across the aisles in Sacramento. Hard to believe. He's a serious Republican. I'm talking issues here. Simply talking about a person who has what we used to call a gentleman or a lady, which is good. That's not to criticize him. But other than that, he's a Reading based. That says something in itself. Reading being the heart of the whatever the Trump-in movement in the state of California, the mountain counties up that way. His chances are slim. I'm going to give you another candidate that's running for governor just because I interviewed him. And if the Republican voters really want to have a debate in November, the people will actually listen. They won't nominate, they won't vote for Daley. Forget him. They'll vote for Michael Schellenberger. Michael Schellenberger is a Berkeley resident. He is running as an independent candidate for governor. He's the author of the book San Francisco, which deals with the hundreds of $millions, which he would contend wasted on the homeless crisis. He, along with a very progressive man I met a week ago in San Francisco, is one of those that advocates reopening of the state mental hospitals. He is for retaining Diablo Canyon, and pursuing nuclear. He was named as a Time magazine environmental hero at one point in time. And he still regards himself as a strong environmentalist, but he's a contrarian when it comes to the establishment. So I just tell my Republican friends out there, if you want to vote for a candidate that's going to create a debate with with Governor Newsom, you might consider Schellenberger. The Dalys, that's just a waste of time.
Speaking of the assembly, we haven't touched on arguably the most important race in Marin this
Yeah.
year in June, and the assembly primary there again, like the Mary Sackett race for Damon Connolly's successor. I thought Damon Connolly would be the overwhelming front runner because, you know, I had at times I didn't think would be very strong, and she may or may not be. Sarah Amendzada surprised the hell out of me by the number of endorsements, and I just checked her website again this morning along with a number of others, and she does have an impressive website, and she does have a few dozen legislators. And I wonder how she did that. That's the one area in which she is noticeably stronger on her website and endorsements than Damon. Somehow, my guess is that she worked the assembly for 6 months before Levine even announced last fall that he wasn't running for re-election. Maybe she was planning on taking on Levine, or she was laying groundwork for the long game. And Damon wasn't planning on running because he assumed Levine had one more term until Levine failed. Suddenly, Damon's running ahead of schedule. And he was caught flat-footed. He only has a few legislators, but you don't usually spend a lot of time up in Sacramento campaigning. In fact, they will tell you, as they did me, you're not going to win the election up here.
Steve Schwartz is the fourth candidate. He's a very active in the food justice movement, and it was a aide to 2 state assembly members in Southern California. And he's not to be disregarded because he personally is a credible fellow. Ida Times Green is it's 1-to-1 is a very good candidate. I mean, I just think, but every time I've met her, I've really been positively impressed. And the bottom line is that we have 4 well-qualified, intelligent, all who could serve candidates. What a relief.
Yeah, Steve Schwartz.
But you can play who is the, but I just want to speak for a second that sometimes you look at the field. I mean, it was like when Barack Obama was running against John McCain. How are we going to lose on this one? I mean, you can't lose. I mean, it's what good guy and good guy. And so I see the assembly race that way. And there are not huge policy differences.
I agree. From the first IJ article, I said, these people all agree on all the major issues from that article. Now they'll say, no, I'm much more environmental or whatever, but
Well,
now, we haven't talked about Sarah Amendzada.
Yes.
She was a surprise to me. Kentfield, I thought, okay, attorney, okay. Mother of a young child. There's several candidates that fit in that category, but running for assembly, not being an elected official, coastal commission. Well, that's not something you usually run for assembly from. How on earth did she get so many endorsements and so much money so quickly? And the truth will come out any day now, because the second filing period just closed last week, and they'll be reporting, I think, in a few days. And that's what will tell the tale. Can Sarah Amendzada sustain that initially really impressive showing with another big showing in her second reporting, or will Damon catch up? I mean,
David's I actually believe I've seen the numbers, but I can't. Too complicated on my screen to pull them up right here, in which Damon has slightly taken the lead over her. And if I have a chance, I'll run them. It's just space situation.
Now he has no labor, but Sarah Amendzada has some. But she has apparently impressed a lot of people. She's a woman. She's bright. She's young. She's there's a growing number of people on there that really want women, that really want youth, and really want people of color. And arguably, she has some, I think, Middle Eastern background or something.
Well, Sarah Amendzada has
impressive
galvanized women like her, who are now emerging 30s, early 40s, 30s to 40s situation, professionally successful voters, by definition, well-educated, who are at the point where they say, I can donate some money to a person I know and like, or similar to me. So she's got a demographic core base, which is emerging as a stronger political force. Women, successful, 30 to 40s. That's it. You want to have a base. That's a darn good base.
So I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I still think Damon is the front runner. I
Yes.
still think Damon will be the #1 vote getter. Sarah will almost certainly be the second vote getter, unless Steve Schwartz, about whom I know practically nothing. Everything I read about him, I said, well, that sounds impressive. But my guess is that he's probably not campaigning in Marin. He's unknown in Marin. He's going to get a very small vote total in Marin because they know him and they don't know any of the 3 Marin candidates. But what if the reverse is true? In Sonoma County, they know him, but they don't know any of the Marin candidates, and he gets most of the vote up there, and he makes the runoff.
I don't think if you walk into a supermarket in the town of Sonoma, it's there on Sunday, just pick one at random and go up to the first person you see and say, I'm going to mention some names to you. Tell me if you've ever have any of these 4.
It's not
You'll get the same result if you go into a supermarket in Kentfield or Point Reyes Station or
they haven't heard of any of them.
No.
Unless they're in Santa Fe and they've heard of Damon Connolly.
That's it. Yeah. Connolly has name recognition in his district. Then we talk about people like you and me, which don't count.
I agree. We know all the political names in
Yeah,
county and maybe Sonoma too, a lot of them, but you're right. Most people don't know any of them, and it doesn't really matter to them whether they're from Sonoma or Marin because they don't know anything about them except maybe Damon Connolly's a county supervisor. Now, I still think that even if there's a little more anti-incumbent fervor, if you will, that's my phrase, this year than most years, and that maybe I'm not recognizing some of it, I still believe that there's enough power and incumbency, unless there's a big anti-incumbent fervor, and I think I'd know if that was happening, that Damon Connolly will be the front runner and will be the first place vote getter. Not that that's that important. If Sarah Aminzadeh manages to consolidate the supporters of Ida Times and Steve Schwartz, she could well win in November. What do you think?
Well, I think I was asked by an organization who does debates. Well, I was asked by Cost. I moderated the last 2 debates, and I suggested, because of the time frame that's coming up, why not just wait till after the primary and have the debate between the 2 who's 1 and 2, and that's the decision. You know, I mean, you can just jam too much into a short period of time, and so let's find out who the runoff is. And I think that's very interesting. We have a state Senate race, by the way.
Gene Yoon is a serious state Senate Republican candidate.
He is I met with him, Asian guy, lawyer in formerly a high-tech guy, but is a lawyer in Kelseyville or someplace like that, Lake County. It's a big district. His issues, the big 3 issues, don't sound very Republican. We ought to teach more civics and history in our schools. We shouldn't censor anything. We just need more civics and history. We need to take the vitriol out of politics. And there was a 3rd one, but they're all kind of good government issues. None of the, what do they call them? The culture wars. Not a word of culture wars. I mean, he even made a point when he said more civics. I don't mean to censor any classes.
He sounds like a smart Republican. The question is, are Republican voters smart enough to vote for him in large enough numbers, recognizing that they have a lot more success than diving into the horribly divisive battles of culture wars?
Don't get me wrong, suggesting that there's a real race. I'm just suggesting that he's credible and a credible person, and which is what we need more of, Craig. You know, the less crazies. I've got a sign. Well, where is this, sir? It says, I'll get it for you. This is, I have to put this on the screen.
Yeah, not all minor candidates are crazies, but there are often no minor candidates. I think we're better off with minor candidates than no other candidates. Jared Huffman, for example, had almost no minor candidates if we get used to this grocery checking clerk in Garberville or wherever the hell he. but he's got several.
On this point, we have some meetings I go to, and I put this at the front door. Less stupid people, more smart people, common sense people running against each other. Sarah and Damon, smart, common sense, credible people running against each other. Same party, but Gene Yoon, Republican, Mike McGuire, Democrat. Great, terrific. That's the goal. A good conversation, give voters a real choice. I don't care if the party's registration is the biggest determining factor in America today. So McGuire wins, but isn't it good to have that conversation? That's how the system's supposed to work, but so rarely does today.
Not only do crazies too often run. Sometimes they win.
Yes.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, did you read about her appearance before some judge who the people of in her district said, wait a minute, the Constitution prohibits anyone from running for office who has engaged in a violent insurrection against the country. And she was involved in January 6th, so she can't run. So please take her name off the ballot. Well, it's a legitimate question, and a judge is trying to decide this. She didn't even have to appear. She did. Funny, she couldn't remember a single thing before January 6th, any of her tweets or anything. You know, it's
Marjorie, I don't remember her name.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I don't remember.
Yeah, the headline said Marjorie Taylor Greene has Alzheimer's disease. I said, what? Oh, is it snarky?
I'm going to give you another candidate. Let's get statewide stuff for a second. First of all, I've got the list of state candidates. Governor, okay. Secretary of State, the state Republican Party has not endorsed a candidate. I went to the state website, which is surprising, which tells me that they, like the Democrats, probably have a 2/3 role.
They have to endorse.
Yeah.
You'd think that the Secretary of State would be considered among the weaker, if not the weakest, statewide candidate to go after because she was just appointed.
No GOP endorsement. In the lieutenant governor's race, I can never pronounce it.
Eleni Kounalakis.
Kounalakis, my Greek is not that good. Is running. The Republican candidate is Angela Underwood Jacobs, and she is the deputy mayor. That's about this nation.
Deputy mayor where?
I didn't say any. I didn't say that. I'm asking you. Where is she the deputy mayor? Lancaster. The city of Lancaster, you know where that is?
Southern California.
High desert.
High desert.
Palmdale. Next to Palmdale. Palmdale, Lancaster. Used to have a joint airport. What else? Oh, well, we have a race for
Yeah, these minor candidates. I like to sum up the statewide races. There are 8 constitutional officers. 6 of them they're all occupied by Democrats and have been for about 20 years. And I suspect that'll continue in the definite future. But usually it's a mix of people that are running for their second term and new people. And there's enough excitement about all the new races and the new. But this year it seems like it's all people running they're in their first term and they're all running for their second term. So there's no excitement in any of the statewide races, just about.
Well, I'll give you one race which interests me. The
Yes.
Attorney General race. Rob Bonta,
Yeah.
a classic legislative Sacramento lifer. I mean, he would shrivel if he wasn't in public office. I mean, what would he do?
He just got elected a few years ago. He was probably on the Board of Supervisors of City Council.
Assembly member.
Okay.
Termed out.
Okay.
He's running against the Republican Nathan Hochman, who is a former assistant U.S. Deputy Attorney General, Attorney General in Washington, federal office, not federal job. And the candidate that interests me,
Lonnie.
Anne Marie Schubert.
Oh,
Anne Marie Schubert was a Republican. She says she never in her life voted for Donald Trump in support of ever, unlike Kevin Walker. She is running as a declined to state, no party preference independent. She's a prosecutor. And here's one factor the Democrats will be listening to. She's an out lesbian. And she is a prosecutor. And she is running against the Chesa Boudin, George Gascon, Rob Bonta, who, by the way, Rob Bonta is the one that wanted the strike force against municipalities that don't honor the RHNA numbers, regional housing needs allocation. So he created a strike force that could go after municipalities. Well, that's why I'm looking at Anne Marie Schubert.
a lot of people will. I agree that he is perceived as far left. I haven't seen any, I don't have a real strong grip on that. The way you word that task force, it makes it sound like it's a horrible thing. I just like to support municipalities' rights to self-control like anybody. And I hate it when
a strike force.
Well, it's just a term for a special team of prosecutors, as you know.
Yeah, wait, with the message. There are many teams. You could you could call it anything.
Yeah, but I've also known
force. So, Rob, that's going to get you some votes.
Yeah,
and it's going to cost you mine.
Although it never came up during my time on the city council, too often in most councils, most years, many housing projects come up before councils that they should pass because we need housing, because we're in a housing crisis at every level and every place. And yet they too often cave in and say no, because a few neighbors get organized and say, no, you got to say no, I don't want that in my neighborhood. And they cave to them. So I think some additional pressure needs to be put on those elected officials. I've felt that for decades.
you think the housing crisis is solvable? I put always right. Housing crisis is soluble.
I'm as strong a housing advocate as just about anybody you know, but
That's
I
my
agree with
question.
some of the
It's
suggestions.
soluble.
Yes, I just don't think they should go as far as some of them are suggesting, like some of
You mean
Scott
they can
Weiner's.
I don't think they can bring the cost of housing down by these state actions.
If they can even slow down its increase, that would be a good thing.
Or I give you another race. First of all, I'm going to ask you the question after I mention the office. What do they do? And you'll know more than everybody, most people out there, and you'll say to yourself, State Board of Equalization.
It's
What
the
do
one
they-
open constitutional office, and usually it comes from wait, oh, that's where their starting place. Then they go into treasurer controller like Fiona Ma and Betty
Well, the
Yee.
purpose of it is to give people a job so they can run for something else after they get turned out.
Someone has to make political policy decisions on taxation of large corp. Now, I'm not an expert on their job, and I've heard it described several times, and I keep forgetting. Taxation of utilities and other large corporations in a fair way that exceeds the capacity of the legislature and other taxing authorities. I don't know.
They stripped the Board of Equalization of most of their tasks 4 years ago because there was a huge corruption scandal. So there's very left to do. They were unable to eliminate the elected positions because, frankly, too many office holders said, but I could run for that. It pays $153,000 a year, car, pension, staff, benefits, and best of all, almost no work because they don't have anything to do.
That may be true. I take your word
State
for it.
bureaucrat could do the whole thing.
They may not be very hard to work, but I just want to insert here that I know the public gets very worked up about the idea that there's not, of jobs appointed by the governor for full-time jobs and do very little work for full-time salary. Not true. I investigated that thoroughly. I had to go to obscure libraries in Sacramento County to find all the gubernatorial appointees. 99% of them are like for $100 a month jobs. And the ones that are full-time, and there are a few dozen, are full-time work.
I have proposed for ex-legislators who want a spot that we create a House of Lords. Nothing to do, but a place to go, and people running around pushing the elevator buttons. All right, there's 3 candidates for the Board of Equalization in our 2nd district, which is gigantic. It's 1/4 of the state, 10 million people. Sally Lieber, who is a member of the legislature, it says council, maybe she's a councilwoman.
No, I know who Sally Lieber is. She's an ex-assemblywoman that lost state senate, I think, twice.
Right. Michelle Pierre-Alioto.
Yeah.
And Peter Veronica, who's the Republican. He's not going to win. Sally Lieber, when it interested me, and this may be a very strong selling point for many people, not for everyone. She's a proud member of the Democratic Socialists of America.
Didn't seem to bother the Bernie Sanders supporters.
I don't
Sally
know.
Lieber.
Michelle Alioto Pierre is Joe Alioto's granddaughter, and she was the San Francisco supervisor, and she was the one that was horribly injured in a skiing accident, some ski-related accident, as a young woman. I just to identify her because many people will remember her from San Francisco. She was a board of supervisors. I have not met any of them.
Ran for Congress about 10 or 15 years ago, and
I can't remember. I think it's
something.
I kind of like Marjorie.
I have a generally good impression of her, and
Yeah.
I'm surprised she's still around. People don't hang around out of office for too long, and it's been quite a while for her. But maybe she's continued to be active and do things. And I admire her being as active as the things she did when she was in a wheelchair, and I assume she still is. But Sally Lieber, I think, got the endorsement of the Democrats, if that means anything or not. Former, maybe they felt sorry for her because she's lost 2 state Senate races after being in the state assembly. And she seems okay, a little more liberal maybe, but it's San Mateo County. It's a lot like Marin, so liberal that even if someone's too liberal for them and they go for someone slightly more moderate, even that moderate that they elect is quite liberal.
Oh yeah. Well, that's like the difference between what's a San Francisco. San Francisco has 2 political parties, the progressives and the moderates. The moderates are what you call progressives outside San Francisco or Oakland. If you bring that San Francisco moderate to pick a state, I don't know, Maryland, they're what you call a liberal to progressive.
Now, you and I have different opinions we've discussed at times over the last 5 or 10 years on progressive, but I agree with your description of San Francisco political parties as progressives and moderates. London Breed would be a raging liberal, progressive, or whatever you anywhere else in the country.
Yeah.
And she's a moderate in San Francisco as a bunch of, same with Mark Leno, same with a whole bunch of other really great
people.
people.
Same with Willie Brown.
Yeah.
Who's the most conservative of them all.
I have to say something about Willie Brown that I've always said I admired, and for years, you, I'm sure, were too. Totally addicted to the California Journal, the preeminent political magazine for 10, 20 years, and it stopped about 10 years ago. But they had ratings of the legislators in about 6 areas every year, and I poured over them and analyzed them and memorized them. Willie Brown was #1 among all 120 California legislators in 3 out of 4 major areas: intelligence, effectiveness. I'm forgetting the other one, but he really is impressive. Not so high in integrity. But he, as he always said, he knew never to cross the line, and he never did cross the line. He was the most investigated politician in America and never got indicted for anything.
Willie also had another virtue which was respected across the whole legislature. If he gave his word, he kept it. And that's a rule. It's a bipartisan rule in Sacramento. If you give your word, if you don't give it, that's fine. That's understandable. You can't for whatever reasons. But when you say, "I promise," that's it. So what haven't we? Oh, Measure A.
Oh yeah, we haven't covered local measures, or let's see, a state probably yes. We haven't really covered national issues. Or Schubert should be going to Q&A pretty soon. Measure A seems like an overwhelming front runner for support, but I admit that support for it has weakened since support for the farmland, the malt stuff, open space has weakened. They reduced it from 20% to 10%, but that might not satisfy people. They may no because they don't want any money to go to open space for malt.
Well, it's the version of the old oyster wars. It's the cow versus elk war, and that's what it's about. That's what the dislike about malt is about. It's ranching versus wilderness.
Are the elk people, if I can call them that? I've seen them, stop intersections in the middle of San Rafael, passing out literature. They're ferocious in number. Are they just animal rights fanatics? Which is okay. I understand that. My wife.
No, they're wilderness fanatics.
Wilderness fanatics. They don't
animals,
want agriculture. They want all.
It's wilderness. It's not the animal. It's not the elk is a vehicle, but the elk isn't the purpose. The purpose is wilderness. A park should be wilderness, and wealthy. They're not wealthy. Ranchers are not inconsistent with a wilderness.
I don't know that I have a strong opinion about that, but this particular state park was created with that exception that the ranches would stay. So why are they unable to envision an exception? And besides, if you go to New England, you'd think there'd be hundreds of state parks. There's one in all of New England. If you go to California, there's tons of them. And Point Reyes is huge. And a lot of it is not ranches. So we have to kick out the ranches? I'm not sure I'm persuaded by that.
I'm sure. No.
Remember,
my job is to give opinion. People forget that. I'm not a reporter. I give opinion.
You told me to be a little neutral, and something.
Who wants to read neutral?
Be a pundit. I'm not even sure I deserve
a pundit.
But I am opinionated, and I like to give my opinions. I write articles, and I keep my lists, and I get on these. But I'm not sure how long I'll do it again, because after this November, I may retire again, because once again, next year there's no elections. But 2024.
Well, there's always something. There'll always be something. National. Really read everybody read yesterday's Times or the day before's David Brooks article. Very good.
7 lessons.
It was just that. And Brooks used to be called a conservative, and then he went to becoming a Greenwich Village conservative. Now he's a traditional liberal, I think it's a better way to put it. But it's good advice to the Democrats. If they don't listen to the advice, they could have a disaster in November. They were aided greatly by the leak of the Roe v. Wade decision. And I'm very curious who leaked it, because it could have come from either side. The conservatives, you cannot, if you're one of the 5, if you change your vote, you are going to be pillared by the right to life people to the day your body decomposes. Forget death.
But this has happened several times before. They thought okay, we got 5 votes now. We're ready to overturn a Roe versus Wade, and one of their 5 goes south on them.
This locks them in.
Now they have 6, and they're probably going to get all 6. And so we've known this was coming. Everybody who reports,
is it 6?
Yes, 6-3. Now when it's all
No. Justice Roberts was not part of the group.
Oh, you're counting 5-4. You're counting Roberts with the liberals.
No, I'm just saying, I call him as, first of all, I prefer to put people's R or D after names of Supreme Court justices. Neil Gorsuch, R. Elena, what's
Kagan.
Kagan, D. Let's stop fooling around.
Yeah.
And under Chief Justice Roberts, I. Independent.
Well, he was appointed by a Republican.
Yeah, and he saved Obamacare.
He did, and several other things, because he was a metropolitan judge that's a little more used to gay people and people of color and adoption. And
he's also philosophically believes that the court should not be a polarizing factor in America. And so that puts him in the I category, which I regard as an honorable category.
Roe versus Wade is probably going to be, it's been the most important issue since this leak came out, although again, the reporters have not been right. It's not, they have not voted yet.
No, but they admit it's a genuine document.
Oh yeah, it may well be his draft, but
well, the Chief Justice admitted it.
I hear Rory Little speak every year to the Marin Bar Association on the Supreme Court, and I love this stuff. Just tremendous stuff. And they write these things and sometimes negotiate them for weeks and months. They're arguing over a legal point or a paragraph or a sentence or a word before they get there. So they change, and and somebody writes an opinion that they may think will eventually get 5 votes, but they don't. And that could be one of these, but probably not. It'll probably get 5 votes, if not 6.
But what happens if you're the person that backs out?
Now you may lock you in this league. But anyway, the Supreme Court, what do you think the result of this will be? Will it fire up the left so that we do better than we otherwise would have in November? Or will it fire up the right? Hallelujah, at last, let's go reward those Republicans.
Well, it's going to be geographical. I mean, there are states that it's the popular thing to do to be against abortion.
Here's my big question, and I realize
California is not one of them.
Totally different topic, but national, same question. And then we got to go to Q&A, I think. I've been wrong on Trump so many times I can't even count. I continually underestimated him, and I may be continuing to do so, but logically, he should be the greatest gift to the Democrats there ever was. He's so bad, spectacularly, on so many levels. He should be a great gift to the Democrats. Yet he keeps being strong. He keeps doing well. He did lose the second time, but geez, it was way too close both times. He could run again, astounding as that seems. I still think he'll be in jail, but I don't know why he's not yet. But why does he continue to be such a major presence? Why? What do you think? Is he going to help the Republicans? Are the Republicans going to take both houses of Congress? By all rights, the Trump should allow the Democrats to increase their leads in both houses. But pundits are saying, no, Republicans could well take either or both houses. What do you think?
Many Trump people understand that he is a deficient human being. How's that for? But what they love about him is he drives the people they really hate nuts. The Democrats. Right. And we have a division in this country where Republicans really hate Democrats almost personally, and Democrats really hate Republicans almost personally.
Too often, that's true.
This is a fatal disease. Fatal. And it got to be, I like to end these things on a positive note. We're going in a direction in this country which is reminiscent of what happened in the 1920s and 1930s in Europe. The divisions are great. The breakdown of democracy, people not trusting the system or elections. That's called, I'm reading a book right now called Strongman. That leads to the strongman. I'm half Italian, but identify as Italian. I look at, I've read quite a bit about Benito Mussolini, the Duce, who was the inventor of fascism. When Hitler rose, they said he was Germany's Mussolini. Mussolini, the senior of the two. A personality not different from Donald Trump, though better educated and more interested in policy, oddly. But a very bad guy, but very popular for a time. And there are still fascist elements in Europe. Some of them are coming back again. And so we're in a very dark time, and there's no reason that America is going to stay a united America. Nothing lasts forever. And so we're in a very dangerous situation, very dangerous. And I just warn everybody. The best thing we can do is kind of detensify it, but I don't see anything happening that will do that. The incentives in politics are to inflame, are to divide all over the place. That's the incentive. And if that's the motivation, as it was in the late 1850s, leading up to the unfortunate circumstances of 1861, we're never going to have a war to keep a union together again. If it breaks up, it breaks up. But it happened once.
At the risk of jumping in, how about some Q&A at this point, gentlemen? Very, very eloquently stated, Dick. I feel like you're wrapping up what many of us have been cogitating about and concerned about for at least the last year, but certainly longer than that. And maybe this is the best medicine for that syndrome that we're all facing. Is we're talking about voting, right? And how do you counter the kind of phenomena that you two have identified here with the schisms and the polarization and the personalization of politics? Maybe just more involvement in the public sector and public sphere on a more sound basis as opposed to an emotional basis, and that's what you're providing. So that's my thank you to you. Let me run into some questions we have, because we have a very engaged audience out there and they have a few questions they'd like answered. Let me start with, well, I guess you've already talked about District 2. Nancy Malcolm asks for a discussion of the District 2 candidates for Board of Equalization. I feel like you've covered it. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that office?
Abolish it.
Okay.
You may be right. But if you like the Democratic Party endorsement, go with Malia Cohen, who may be the front runner, but there are some other interesting candidates.
A very fine Democratic socialist, she is.
Okay. We have a question about consolidation of the districts that you've referred to, the school districts being so scattered as opposed to LA, San Francisco. They've got a single district for many, many times the number of population here. That issue comes up a lot. It comes up in terms of the school boards. It comes up in terms of sanitary districts and other micro governmental entities here in Marin County. It always comes up. It gets discussed. Everybody seems to agree, yes, it's inefficient. We should really consolidate. We ought to do something about it. You guys made a very cogent point on that. And then nothing happens. And I get frustrated, and many people like me get frustrated that there seems to be an identification of a clear path forward to solve this issue, but it never gets taken. Any idea why we're so locked into this modality and we can't seem to make progress?
For most people, it's a very low priority. It's on their list. And I think it's a good idea, but it's a very low priority. For the people in those offices or benefit from multiplicity of districts, it's a high priority. And so they devote their time. LAFCO tried to merge sanitary districts in Southern Marin some years ago. Every sanitary, why anybody would want to be on a sanitary board? I mean, I sat for 2 years on the Southern Marin Sanitary Board. My doodling increased gigantically. I mean, it is the most boring. There's no policy decisions. You listen to a report, make sure nobody's stealing the money. But they love these posts, and they're willing to fight like mad to be on the Homestead Valley Sanitary or Community Service District. And so the people who are most motivated tend to get their way, especially when the other side, that's true. We ought to do something about that, but that's as far as they go. Greg, what do you think?
Although the argument is compelling to reduce the surplusage of a duplication of superintendents and boards of trustees, the boards of trustees cost almost nothing. It's a few $100s a month or nothing. The superintendents are a considerable expense, but they're already doubling up as John Carroll, who's running for superintendent. He's been for a long time the superintendent of 2 small districts. So there is some attempt, as Mary Jane has said in speeches for 10, 20 years now, to consolidate expenses, if not consolidate districts. However, as I mentioned to you, I'm still in favor of what you call the Gladys Gilliland plan to consolidate along high school district lines. And the one thing that would stop that, in my opinion, is that you were critical, perhaps with some degree of justification. I should know more about the TAM district board since my mom served on it a few decades ago. But if it really has such problems, maybe it's because it's large high school district. And if you're abolishing the small districts in favor of the large district, are there enough people out there and saying, wait a minute, I like my elementary school district. They're small, efficient, local, accessible. I don't like the high school district. And you're abolishing those local elementary districts in favor of the high school district?
There's also, when we talk about consolidation, we're also talking about the other districts, the sanitary districts. What policy, this is a rhetorical question, the sanitary district directors decide on a regular basis?
Well, there is the
Will the pipes be
the sewer lateral regulation.
You could abolish each and every one of them. You could have forget the county agency. Let the county of Marin do it. Just have, I don't know, whoever the superintendent of sewers is. I like the term sewer better than sanitary district. It's kind of more gritty. Greg Gildersleeve, by the way, if I recall, was a sewage director. Remember the old radio television show in the 50s to 60s? He was, that was his empire. He was the small town's sewage commissioner.
I'm closer to consolidation for a number of reasons, including some that you might not suspect, judging by my comments thus far. When I was on the college board, I was kind of an outlier, and I thought, I'm not sure that we need to have locally elected community college boards when all over the Bay Area and the state, all these community are breaking 99% of the same decisions that could be made by a regional board or the state. Now, the only exception is that if you have all these college board members that may not make substantive political policy decisions very often, they're totally wrapped up in that college. On those rare occasions when a substantive policy decision does come along, they are the best equipped to make that, as opposed to the Board of Supervisors or some regional or state agency that doesn't know College of Marin.
Okay, enlightening. Let me move on. I've got a question here from one of our listeners. State Controller, does Lonnie Chen, a Republican who Obama appointed to the Social Security Administration and who worked for Mitt Romney, have a chance of being elected against Malia Cohn?
Malia Cohn has very high experience record. She served on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors.
That's kind of
that with a straight face.
That's an unusual jump to go from a Board of Supervisors to statewide office. The only one I can think of who's tried that in the last few years is Hal Brown, when he ran for state insurance commissioner, and he lost badly.
He did.
I worked for him.
He did. The answer is, I've heard very good things, and I'm looking at my list here to get the names correct for the controller's race. Controller, yes, Lonnie Chen. Well, first of all, there are good things been written about Lonnie Chen. And so the answer is he hopefully may be another good credible candidate. I also see that Steve Glazier, state senator from Contra Costa County, Democrat state senator, is running. Glazier has been a outspoken critic of the BART board and its management, which of course has met with great popularity among the BART constituency other than the employees, the writers, in other words. So he's a credible guy. The reality in politics today, 2022, California, Mississippi, Wisconsin, is the highest factor in people voting for a candidate is their party brand. And so this is the first round, but in November, the party brand will be the top two people. Unless there's two Democrats, there won't be two Republicans. Unless there's two Democrats, it'll be a Democrat versus Republican. And we'll be back down to the Newsom numbers of 61 to 70 to 67, just because of the brand. And so we've got so accustomed to voting our identity. I identify as an independent. Well, some people, Greg, you identify as a Democrat, other people identify as Republican, but that's the biggest statistical factor in determining how people today cast the vote. I vote for the man, not the party. Vote for the woman, not the party, is an anachronism. It doesn't happen anymore. It might be a good idea, but it doesn't happen as much as it did in the olden days.
So you've got several races where there's a multitude of Democrats voting, running, I should say. And so even if you're a Democrat and all you look for is the D, you still have a choice to make on some of these.
In the primary.
that race is so different from all the others for many reasons. One is it's the only one where you don't have an incumbent running, and Malia Cohen is not, he's sort of like an incumbent because she's been anointed by the Democratic Party. But again, she's a county supervisor. That's an unusual place to run for a statewide office. Steve Glazier, you'd think, would be the anointed incumbent. He's the highest ranking. He's a state legislator. He's too anti-union. He was against Bart. He's sort of a thorn in the side of the Democrats. He's not progressive enough for them.
Actually, he's not against Bart. He's for the Bart riders.
Yes, he's
not
critical of Bart. Critical of the Bart board. I meant to say. Now, but Lonnie Chen,
but they're not a constituency. The union's the constituency. The riders, they're out there.
Lonnie Chen, I've read a few things about too, and I agree that he is a more interesting Republican than most, appointed by Obama, and also because he has a more moderate views. He's like that other Republican you mentioned. That so if Republicans are smart, they will vote for him, and he may get more votes than most Republicans. Probably not enough to win, maybe not even enough to make the runoff. But he is a more interesting and potentially a bigger vote getter because I think he is more moderate and has more ideas which cross the aisle.
Okay, let's move on. We've got a few minutes left. We have a question from Phyllis Metcalf. Assembly race, which is more important to represent Marin? Damon Connolly's experience and work in Marin, or Sarah's experience and work at the state level?
I did support Damon early on. Damon and I were buddies even before we both got elected to the city council together 15 years ago, and all through my time on the city council. And in recent years, we did have a falling out for a few years, but we patched that up. So I'm supporting Damon. But it's weird that, he was the young buck and now he's the old experienced guy.
That's life. That's
life. I know that feeling too.
Not just politics.
Right.
Everything.
But he has to not look like that. I mean, he does not want to look plastic or just dial it in. He's got to reclaim that passion that he had in his earlier years and not just dial it in. And I think he can do that. But Sarah, I think her work in Sacramento is exaggerated. When she says she's crafted policy and legislation, how much does the average coastal commissioner do that? My guess, not at all. And also she's worked for other things in other organizations. Well, she may have. Everybody's been a part of some board, advocates for some law. They may even have suggested a wording change if they're lucky. Do they say they craft policy and law? No. And I worry about Sarah Amanzadeh in that respect.
How can I put this? People need some experience. Life, first of all, the most important experience, I look at it as for a judge. What's the most important experience? Life experience, so that you identify with other people. And give Ida Green and Times Green credit because she's identifying other life experiences. So the fact that what you compare a supervisor versus, we're looking for basically qualified, common sense people with some experience and knowledgeable about the process. In my mind, they're both experienced. Once again, I liked all four candidates. And I feel the word I use is, are they qualified? That's the threshold. And in some of these races, they're not qualified.
I completely agree. And Sarah Amanzadeh is sort of borderline in that she is not qualified in the traditional sense of elected office, but she has a lot of other important qualifications. Ida Times Green has just completed her second term on the Sausalito Marin City School District. That is a challenge. Even if it wasn't, she's obviously qualified. But we haven't talked much about her. And immediately, a couple of my really close friends, Pat Johnstone and Ruth Carter, are very progressive, are supporting Ida Times. And probably a whole lot of like-minded people like that. Now, in the past, far left quixotic challengers to Levine for assembly didn't work. Dan Monty, I was Dan Monty's treasurer. But Ida Times, people are saying, is much more likely to succeed. First of all, it's an open seat. And I don't know how strong her support is. I watched her when she ran for re-election 4 years ago, and I don't know if she can raise the money and get the endorsements. Do you think so?
No, Ida has a benefit, though, of having a personality that people like. People underestimate that for all candidates. Let me mention too, Andrew Cuomo comes up as a name. Why did he hang with nobody supporting him? It just swinging in the wind because he was a jackass. And everybody hated him because he'd been miserable to them. And all of a sudden he's in trouble. Oh, they said, this will be fun to watch. And that's what happened to him. So you pay the price. So people like Ida or Sarah or Steve or Damon, these are nice. These are people you'd have a drink with. I won't go into names, but there are some folks out there that are just jackasses of both parties. God knows. I mean, does Donald Trump have a friend? I mean, is there somebody he would actually sit down with and just chat about the old days? I mean, think of that. No. And so people, but if he had a little humanity and warmth, he would expand to, you know, it applies everywhere. We buy insurance from people and cars, and we go to lawyers because we think they identify with us and we like them. It's human nature. So candidates with that, and I give Ida that. That's why she's stronger than you would think, because she has a personality that's a good personality. And her bad luck is she's in a race with 3 other people who have a great personality, so it doesn't stand out.
It's true. And even her claim to be the progressive candidate, as probably several of them do, I have trouble distinguishing her as by far more progressive than anybody else, if any more progressive than I. She'd probably come up with a couple of examples, but maybe all of them could. And again, you and I have different opinions on progressive. I think progressive is a fancy new label for liberals, and the distinctions are not that significant. You tend to place progressives in a far more left position compared to liberals. I think it's like conservatives,
right, I do.
Conservatives trashed the term affordable housing, so we stopped using it and started using the term workforce housing. Same thing. I think conservatives trashed the word liberals, so we started using the word progressives.
Yes, that's
Very
true.
much the same
And
thing.
then they're going to trash progressives and they can come up with something else.
Maybe.
I hate to see what that's going to end up as. All right, let's move on. I got time for just a couple more. One of our questioners asks, any thoughts on the Ross Town Council election?
Pivotal. It's America hangs on this. If this goes wrong, remember I was gloomy about the future of America? It's all over.
They almost never have contested elections, and when they do, I hate to say it, no one cares, because they, as candidates, rarely get involved in countywide stuff on MCC or other things. And so it's like Ross and Belvedere are kind of invisible. Once in a while, it's like, oh, from Ross and Belvedere, how cool. We never see anybody from your towns. And so these 3 people, like one guy appeared at one candidate's forum. That's all I know.
All I can tell you is when I was on the council, there was a couple of, from both Ross and Belvedere, there were a couple of outstanding people and leaders. It just comes and goes. You know, it's cyclical. No, seriously, Ross is a well-run place. I have no doubt that whoever is elected is going to represent Ross ably, and more importantly, Ross will still be a nice place 4 years from now. I can predict that without doubt.
Nicholas Cox was the new candidate from an old family in Ross, I think. I know that his sister or mother, I think, got the endorsement of the Democratic Party because he's the only one that showed up. He's okay.
The old days, that would have been the kiss of death.
I agree. They usually don't seek the Democratic Party endorsement. They're the only ones that, I mean, I can understand some people turning it down, but Ross and Belvedere people usually turn it down. Maybe because they have some more Republicans, maybe just because they more firmly believe this ought to be a nonpartisan office. It is a nonpartisan office by definition. That doesn't mean you can't seek the endorsement of the Democratic Party if you're a Democrat, or the Republican Party if you're Republican, or whatever.
The Republicans don't broadcast their endorsements.
Why would they? I bet they do sub rosa.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, couple more. You might have touched on this, but I want to make sure I cover it in case you didn't. And I'm sorry, because I'm sometimes distracted watching the question feeds as you guys are talking. But have you covered the controller candidates? We have a question from Nancy Malcolm as to whether or not you have thoughts on that.
Controller. Oh, that's
I have to look at the ballot myself.
I thought I had these memorized.
Greg, I'll give you a broader question. How does the province of British Columbia do without electing all these sub offices?
British Columbia elects one regional government. That's it.
They elect the parliament.
They don't elect the parliament.
They elect the parliament. That's it.
British
So
Columbia.
controller. I'm sorry, controller.
But
We
all
have
Canadian, all Britain, all Australia, they don't have this whole list of people nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah.
The parliament fills it. You're the cabinet member in charge of this area, and so at some point in time, it's an interesting question to ask. Why are we voting for all these posts?
They do that and it works, but if you talk to a huge number of people in the country, they will say it doesn't work because there's no connection. There's not enough connection between the local people and these high government officials. Now, everybody in the world loves to complain about their government. Why should we be any different? The question is our government really worse? In some ways it is. There are an awful lot of levels of government. So that's why they call it bureaucracy.
Given using Russia as an example, we've got a lot right going in this country. That doesn't mean you can't correct things. And the Democrats and Republicans, I think, would both accept that truism. The founders never thought that the Constitution would stay immobile. They always thought it was going to be a change in documents and there'd be constitutional conventions and all this sort of stuff. Another thing that didn't happen. That was the plan, but it didn't happen. And so sometimes we need to change things. We can all come up with our own list.
We did talk about the controller race. And I think my last statement was that Malia Cohen is the endorsed Democratic candidate, but she's the only one that's not an incumbent, and she may be weaker as a result. And also as a result of the fact that she's a county supervisor, that's kind of unusual to go to statewide office. And because there's another Democrat running, a state senator, Steve Glazier, and because there's a very interesting Republican running, Lonnie Chen.
We made a mistake. Malia Cohen did have another high office other than San Francisco supervisor.
Oh yeah, Board of Equalization. That's right.
A job with no function.
Yeah,
That's the usual procedure.
We have a comment from one of our audience members that pointed that out, that she has that other position as well. So
I forgot that.
okay,
That's not a qualification.
yeah, well, so kind of at the end, let me just have one little comment here from Jerry Peters. He's Dick, can you hold up your sign again? Jerry wants to see that and asks how he can get a couple versions of that for himself. I guess he was a real fan of that sign.
Jerry has seen this probably in real life, but it's right here. A warning: no stupid people beyond this point.
All right.
The answer is you can get it exactly where I got it. At the corner at Central Park, at the corner right by the Plaza Hotel. There's vendors in the park selling everything.
No kidding.
$6. And
wow.
so all you need to do is go to New York City, Manhattan, Central Park. You'll be happy when you do this. I'll go with you, Jerry.
I'm glad we got that question in. I wouldn't
Greg
want,
can come too. We'll have a lot of fun.
I wouldn't want this program to end without that having been presented there, because it's important information for us all. Okay.
You can put this in front of the Marin Coalition meetings and it would be,
That's true. That's true. So last question is my question of a personal nature. And you had mentioned this idea of a House of Lords, which I had never thought of before. And I just wanted to know, if I wear this hat, would that,
yes,
would that qualify me to serve on the House of Lords? Because
that would make you speaker.
there you go. All right. Well, on that note, I can't think of a better way to end. All right, enough of me.
Thank
you guys
this is always great. Greg and I have done this before. We always look forward to this. And the Marin Coalition is a terrific group. And certainly we both have a lot of friends that belong, but just want to say thank you for inviting us.
It wouldn't be a year without you guys. We love you for it. We thank you for coming back time and time again.
It's a pleasure. Even though I loved as much as anybody eating lunch with you all in person, and I look forward to it when that returns. And we even got a free bottle of wine of the deal. In fact, I always wanted to create my own sign that said, "We'll talk politics for food." Now I don't even get the food. No, I still love it.
Put that next to your "No Stupid People" sign.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you both. This is great. To our audience, thank you for watching. Look for this if you'd like to review it on our web archives. We will let you know as soon as we know whether our next program is going to be in June or in the fall. But one way or another, we will be back. We'll either be back here on Zoom, or we will be back hopefully in person on our platform at McGinnis. One way or another, we thank you for being here. Great program. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.